This is the Happy Hour.
You guys going to happy hour?
Coming at you live from the heart of Lincoln, America.
Yeah, I'll come for a couple.
Here are your hosts, Nick Sehnert.
I am a huge guy.
And Enrique Alvarez Clary.
C is for chunk.
Brought to you by Empire Fence and Netting on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com.
That is right. Welcome in. It is the happy hour with one of those hosts, Nick Sehnert, with you. Rico will be joining potentially from time to time, but mostly it's going to be kind of the happy hour with Nick, as we'll be going from a new time slot, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., mostly on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays throughout the week. We obviously have other shows happening at 6 p.m. on Thursday, with We Talk Facts with Eric Strickland and those guys. And then also Friday, the Corner 3 with Austin Norman, breaking down all things on the hardwood. So we got plenty of stuff to get to. Excited for the new opportunity as well, right? Obviously, make sure you tune in weekdays every day, Monday through Friday, 1 to 2, for the locker room with Coach Mikey Daniels and Chancellor Brewington. Those guys, great insight there. And with that, we move to 6 p.m. So we appreciate you guys. If you ever tuned in or listened at 1 p.m. to the happy hour, appreciate you guys maybe migrating or moving over to 6 p.m. to kind of keep tabs on everything that we have to say here. As always, same thing, same rules apply. 402-464-5685. The Honda of Lincoln hotline and the Starter Heyman text line are open for you guys the entire show today, as well as the Starter Heyman Jewelers live video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Allo Channel 961. It might get just a little less exciting on the video stream just because there's no Rico and you never knew what he was going to do on the video stream and with his camera work. But for the most part, it's going to be me. We'll have plenty of guests that stream in throughout the course of the show. Is already lined up a good number of them, including one tomorrow night on Wednesday night that I think you guys will really enjoy from a Colorado perspective as well, to really break things down on the Colorado Buffaloes. Once again, Nick Sehnert with you. I do want to say thanks to Rico real quick, just because we started a show together back on April 16th, 2021. If you can believe it, August 16th, 2021. So just a few years ago, right? And we had the happy hour. We kept it the title the same throughout those 3 years, and just past what was 3 years of doing an hour show every single day for the most part. And obviously, and thanks to DP for giving us that opportunity from the get-go, because at that time I would have been 20 years old. So you don't see a lot of opportunities given out like that to people that are not even out of college at that point yet. So I appreciate DP, and I hope he understands and knows that I do thank him for the opportunity, but especially to my co-host Rico, right? I mean, the guy and Rico and I have been through a lot. We've grown up a lot. I think we can all agree on that part of it. The show hopefully got a lot better throughout the course of those 3 years. We had some really fun, exciting guests. I think back, I was doing this last week when we found out that Friday was going to be our last show, and we didn't tell people because that's, once again, the happy hour lives on, right? I'll still be doing a show. You'll still hear Rico throughout multiple avenues and channels, and sometimes on this show, especially when we want to break down Nebraska volleyball. But I found out, I was thinking about, okay, what are some of the guests that we've been able to have on, as Rico, who's just entered his 30s, me as a young guy in the 20s, in the early 20s, and it was really, really cool. Got to talk to some people like Justine Wong-Arantes, and that's, really, really fun. Our weekly conversations with Steve Mark of Inside Nebraska. Steve's going to be a part of this going forward, because we appreciate his insight as always. Like the countless number of beat writers and former players and even nonprofit folks in the community and in the city of Lincoln, we really appreciate them just, joining the show, joining the program. And like I said, thanks to DP for allowing us 3 years of having the happy hour. Originally started from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., then kind of changed and transferred over to 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And we hope that you guys enjoyed myself and Rico. So yeah, Rico will join. We'll have multiple 93.7 The Ticket hosts on this show, on my show, throughout the next couple of months. And and potentially years of doing a show at 6 p.m. every single night, kind of just wanting to, put everything that's happened throughout the day of sports, right? We're going to focus a lot on Nebraska throughout these next couple of weeks and months and days and years and so on and so forth. Understandably so, right? But then we're also going to dive into the national side of things, right? Where, nobody talks about some football program from the South, but let's go ahead and let's talk to somebody that knows a lot more than I do about it. And I really enjoy having guests on programs. I really enjoy that piece of it. I like talking to the people that are much more knowledgeable than me. I mentioned I started doing the show on the ticket at 20. And it started back on the student section on Sundays with a person that no longer works here. And then it translated over to a 1 p.m. show or 2 p.m. show at that time, like I've talked about with Rico. And here we are at 6 p.m. on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights on 93.7 The Ticket. So there's going to be a lot of stuff. Been fortunate enough to talk to some people and get the verbal agreement saying, yeah, let's do this. Let's talk about it. And we'll be joined by one special guest that we had on the happy hour last year. He'll be zooming in, and we'll join the show tomorrow night at 6:30 to kind of preview the Buffaloes. I'll tell you more about it in the next segment or in the next couple of minutes. But like I said, enough about that. This is where you can find us. You can always follow me on Twitter, Nick_Sehnert. If you don't know how to spell the name, it's Sehnert is how you spell the last name, pronounced Sehnert. But Nick Sehnert is where you can find us on the Twitter sphere. Appreciate everybody that's kind of following the mission over there. It's going to be a lot of Nebraska stuff. As I mentioned, we'll talk big picture college football here in this first segment, just because there's a lot of stuff to get to from week 1 in college football. We're starting this at the perfect time, right? Because if a lot of people don't know, I'm a huge baseball guy, but man, there's nothing like college football being back. And it's been a really, really good couple of days of games. It started back 2 Saturdays ago now with Georgia Tech and Florida State. Florida State's blunders continue on Monday night, right? So it kind of encapsulates the entire week of college football. That Saturday to, what is now today's Tuesday. So last night, Monday night, on Labor Day, it kind of encapsulates that into week 1 of college football. I understand that the previous weekend it was week 0, but I think, if you're going to play football games that day, maybe everybody should just start on week 0 or week 1. If you're asking me, I think there's a lot to get to though. And in this first segment, we're going to break down quarterbacks specifically. Quarterbacks are a huge part. And as I'm watching the quarterback play, not only last night with the Florida State game, but also the Clemson and Georgia game on Saturday morning, or Tyler Van Dyke in Wisconsin against Western Michigan. I believe that was on Friday night that Wisconsin got away with that one. DJ Uiagalelei, like we talked about last night, Cade Klubnik at Clemson. But then on the flip side, how about Cam Ward at Miami, right? Where now Miami, who went by the players or the recruits section at the Florida Gators Stadium, the Swamp, and said, we run this state of Florida. Well, number one, that's really, really strong from Miami, but also really, really bad news for the University of Florida. Really, really bad news for the University of Florida. Obviously, the SEC, some teams looked fine. Georgia, dominant as always, right? Georgia, dominant as always with that 34-3 win over Clemson over the weekend. But also, the Big Ten didn't look too shabby either. 17-1 as a league. Hello. Yeah, we'd probably take that. 17-1 as a league. The one loss coming because of a Minnesota missed field goal at the last moment over against North Carolina at home. I think Nebraska fans were having some deja vu there because obviously you had last year's situation where Minnesota hits that field goal to end the game and they end up beating Nebraska in game 1 of the Matt Rule era. But now this year they missed the field goal and North Carolina goes on the road led by Mac Brown, who people forget is still at North Carolina. And throughout this changing landscape of college football, it just feels like Mac Brown's just always going to be here. But no, so you have North Carolina escape Minneapolis with a victory. So that was the lone Big Ten loss. Every other Big Ten team, all 17 of them, were victorious over their first slate of games. So we got a lot of stuff to get to. In the second segment, Deion Sanders of Colorado, Coach Prime, spoke today. So we'll dive into some of that. Coordinators for Nebraska spoke as well. So we have plenty of stuff to get to. I teased the fact that we'll have a guest tomorrow, and he came on the show last year. came on the show last year with Rico and myself before I headed out to Boulder. I think it was actually one of those that I recorded beforehand, and we played it while I was on the plane to Denver. But we're going to be joined tomorrow night by the voice of the Colorado Buffaloes, Mark Johnson, who might have the best radio voice of them all. I mean, the guy has such a good voice for radio, and you'll be able to hear that tomorrow. So we'll dive into Colorado in the next segment, talk about Nebraska, Colorado specifically. But and I'm sure this first segment, Nebraska is going to be brought up because when we're talking quarterbacks, how about Nebraska finally having a guy that you don't panic as soon as he takes a 3-step or a 5-step drop? I mean, that's a big part. Nebraska hasn't had that. Nebraska, they just haven't. And whether that's been a misidentifying of talent or the inability to develop, I suppose, I think maybe it could be a mixture of both at times. Nebraska is struggling to not only identify and bring in the right guy, but also develop them once they're on campus. And everybody's going to say, Nick, that's been the problem at every single position. Well, maybe. But I think you look at college football and you look at specifically Florida State. And I kind of made this thought up when I was watching Florida State fall behind to Boston College last night. There was a moment where Boston College, I mean, you look at the stats and there was like 250 rushing yards for Boston College in the game, 25 or 21 rushing yards in the ball game for Florida State. And you wonder, okay, so Florida State's identity must be passing the ball. Well, then you look at after the first quarter of play, and DJ Uiagalelei, who, don't forget, had a couple of options after Oregon State following Jonathan Smith moving on and going to Michigan State. DJ Uiagalelei was like, okay, it's time for me to find a new landing spot because I want to play Power 5 conference football. And I think when you look at DJ, he had a couple of different options, settled on Florida State. Cam Ward on the other side of things also had a couple of options. Florida State was one of them. And this is where that misidentification comes into play for Mike Norvell. Whatever the case may have been, if they selected DJ over Cam Ward, number one, it looks really, really bad through 2 weeks of football. And number two is Florida State's lacking this identity. And I made the comparison last night as I was watching the game with a couple friends. Like, Florida State, watching them on offense last night felt a whole lot like watching Nebraska on offense in 2023. It did. That's the only comparison as a Nebraska media member, as somebody that covers the team and watches practice and was in the stadium for games last year and went to a couple of the road games. That's what I gathered. No real identity. They couldn't really run the ball all that well. I talked about it last night, or talked about it just a couple minutes ago. What was it? Less than 25 rushing yards as a team last night against BC. And not to mention, there was more adversity for Boston College last night against Florida State than the other side. Florida State's this team that on the defensive side, they have like 3 of their front 7 who are projected to be early NFL draft picks. One of those, by the way, former Nebraska commit Patrick Payton a couple years ago. But you look elsewhere and Florida State, not to mention, hey, don't forget, they're playing in extreme heat and humidity down there. I think they said it was 90 degrees at kickoff with 60% humidity in the air down in Tallahassee. Boston College was having guys cramp up left and right. They were exiting the field. They were jogging off. They were trying to stretch it out, trying to get water. Bill O'Brien, in his first game as the head coach for the Boston College Eagles, was sweating through his shirt. You could see his undershirt was just like soaked. And then his polo that he was wearing, his pit stains were all over the place. So you throw in that adversity of Boston College isn't used to those conditions up in Boston. Florida State is. They shouldn't have travel lag after the game in Dublin. And Nebraska fans know that whole situation too, because you come back and I think, if I remember correctly, Nebraska, they had to play the following week against North Dakota. If I remember correctly, they were a little sluggish at times, but ultimately did the job and got the win that day. But for Florida State specifically, it was a situation of they come back, they don't have to play that following Saturday. They get 2 extra days off. And I'd be really worried about now, okay, what about the letdown this coming week when they have to face off against somebody and you only have 6 days to prepare, or 5, if I can get my math correct. That's where I'd worry about the letdown. Well, now, just from the fatigue standpoint, I should say, now you throw in, okay, guess what? You were a team that started in the top 10 and now is 0-2. Your chances of the playoff, which in a day and age of college football where with the 12-team playoff, every scenario is open. I mean, let's be honest, right? We're talking about one lost team saying, yeah, you know what? There's a chance that they can make the playoff. And nobody can tell me and say, yeah, you know what, Nick, you're wrong. Because there's no baseline. There's no data. There's no history that can tell us differently. We only have the 4-team playoff. It's similar to when the 4-team playoff was instituted back in 2014. And we were going out throughout the regular season, especially later into the second half of the regular season, and saying, well, this team, how much is the committee going to value strength of schedule? And how about a road win and this and that and that and the other, right? Nobody could sit across from you and say, you know what? That's a stupid idea. That's a stupid thought process. Because nobody had any baseline information to go off of except the committee. So now we're in this spot of college football, and we're really going to be able to only do this for 1 or 2 years, where we can say, all right, can a 2-loss Florida State team, if they compete in the ACC, can they get in? I mean, you want to say no, but I guess there's also no baseline. I don't think Florida State's going to get into the playoffs. I think they have a lot more bigger problems than having to worry about that. Number one, starting with their head coach. But I sat there last night and go, man, this feels a lot like Nebraska last year, where Boston College was fine defensively. They're fine. And I had a lot of thoughts about just like Nebraska and how they're viewed in college football from a recruit standpoint, or how they should be viewed in college football from a recruit standpoint. I'm thinking about, the fan, and this was because, Florida State is doing some renovating to their stadium. And if you were watching the game last night, you could see that, and it was really bad for a camera angle, by the way. They're redoing the stands that the camera can see, like the second level. So, about halfway up the stands, there's nobody there. There's just no seats and stuff. There's just rubble. And the bleachers down low in the 100 section is what I'm guessing they're referred to as. They're full, right? And the rest of the stadium throughout it is full as well. But I'm sitting there going, like, I think we sometimes forget, like, in this day and age of NIL, it's still difficult to get guys to places like a Boston College. Not because they're not good at football, and they brought in a guy like Bill O'Brien who brings the NFL experience, who brings the success at Penn State, where I believe he was over 500 by a couple of games at least. But he brings this understanding of what it takes to get to the NFL, similar to Matt Rule at Nebraska. And he was able in his first game, and it reminds me a little bit of Brett Bielema at Illinois, who Bielema was never a head coach in the NFL, but was the assistant with the Patriots and so on, is these guys were able to come in, rally their guys, and figure out who is fitting the expectation or the culture. We overuse that word culture, but fitting the culture, and who can perform game number one, who can get out there. And this goes back to, once again, the misidentification, the inability to develop guys, mainly at the quarterback position. Look at the 2 quarterbacks last night. And if you want to throw Nebraska into this conversation, that's fine. We can do that. 402-464-5685. But look at the 2 quarterbacks last night. On one side, you had an experienced guy, a multi-year starter, specifically at Boston College in Thomas Castellanos. A lot of people want to call him Castellanos, like Nick Castellanos from the Philadelphia Phillies. It's Castellanos. You actually pronounce the L's with the 2 L's in his name. So you have Thomas Castellanos, who is a very mobile guy. He missed a receiver on a deep crossing route, missed him badly, and missed some throws. Had some nice ones last night, but a lot of his better throws were the intermediate to medium passing game type of passes. But misses on some of the deep balls, but man, that guy is elusive. He is quick, and he causes havoc for defenses. But most importantly, he's experienced at Boston College. Boston College, Bill O'Brien came in, didn't really try to change what they did. I watched a couple Boston College games in 2023. You have Robichaux, in the backfield, along with Ward in the backfield for Boston College. And pair that with an experienced quarterback. Yeah, you got some decent wideouts, but you were strong up front. And they played bully ball with Florida State. Once again, like I said at the start of this conversation, a defensive front that is supposed to have NFL draft potential across the front seven. You played bully ball for the second week in a row. Florida State's opponent did that to them. There's bigger problems at Florida State than just the quarterback. But Florida State's quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei, if you have heard me on shows, especially on with Rico before, I'm a big DJ guy. I really like DJ Uiagalelei. But in an offense like Florida State, where the offensive line struggled immensely these last 2 weeks, and you graduate Keon Coleman, who was the Michigan State transfer, went to Florida State in 2023, and then moved on to the NFL, I believe drafted by the Bills. You move on from him, or he moves on, I should say, graduates. And you also graduated a quarterback in Jordan Travis, who your coach was kind of tied at the hip with. And normally that's a bad thing. Normally it's a bad thing if your quarterback is tied at the hip with your head coach. It can be. I mean, we see it in Nebraska, right? Whether you want to talk Scott Frost and Adrian Martinez, whether you want to talk about the whole Jeff Sims stuff last year, whatever it may be. But ultimately, the record doesn't lie. That Mike Norvell with Jordan Travis was 29-9. Without him, he is now 2-10 in his games at Florida State. Mike Norvell, obviously the former Memphis head football coach. So I sat there last night going, okay, is this a DJ Uiagalelei problem as I'm watching him go 1 for 5 with 5 yards? There was a point halfway through the second quarter, I believe with like 7 minutes and 20 seconds left in the second quarter, where DJ had not completed a pass across the line of scrimmage. He had thrown in the flat to the running back. Then he scrambled up the field for 5 yards. That's how he got his 5 yards. But I sat there and I go, okay, is this a DJ problem or is this a Florida State issue? And yeah, I think DJ was not himself and has not been great by any means these last 2 weeks. But if you're going to sit here and tell me that, as I watch the tight end number 84 have 5 targets, all 5 of them hit his hands and he drops them all, has 0 receptions on 5 targets. How do you tell your quarterback who's seen college football at the highest level, played at Clemson, replaced Trevor Lawrence at Clemson, then went to Oregon State under Jonathan Smith, made a bowl game, really resurrected that program under Jonathan Smith, and then now goes to Florida State, who was probably left out of the playoff last year, even though they shouldn't have been. I feel like they didn't deserve to be in, but it's fine. Still a playoff contender in Florida State. How are you going to tell him, hey, go and keep throwing that way? All right, so I'll throw to number 9, and I'm blanking on his name right now. Drop pass. 15 yards, wide open, does his job, drop pass. And then you try your next option. Unable to get open. I mean, so like there's a lot of issues going on with Florida State right now. But like I mentioned, quarterbacks are at the center of it all. And people get mad, throughout the offseason, whether it was Sam Leavitt for Nebraska, who, as they were targeting him through the portal, or whether it was Kyle McCord at Ohio State, or even, go down the list. Ultimately, Dylan Raiola ends up being at Nebraska. But even going back to last year or the previous years, when it was Casey Thompson, when it was Jeff Sims, or now this year with Dylan Raiola, it's extremely difficult to try to maneuver, fix your offense and center it around a new guy each year. And if you are unable or you miss the boat on the identification piece of it, you're kind of screwed. The greatest example is probably Clemson. Clemson loses, and I get that I'm not talking Big Ten football. I get that I'm not really referencing Nebraska a whole lot in this, but I want this to kind of be an informational piece and just like thinking outside the box of what it all means when we watch college football on a national scale each Saturday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, if you're week 1, is Look at Clemson. Clemson had 7 straight seasons where they were at least once ranked number 1 in the AP poll. That's a pretty good stretch. You're talking about competing with the Alabamas in that stretch. You're talking about competing with the Nebraskas of old. You're talking about competing with the Texases of the late 2000s when Mac Brown was there and Colt McCoy. And you could even compare it to that, the Texas kind of downgrade or lapse in success. But Clemson, and I heard Joel Klatt talking about this. I'm a big Joel Klatt fan. I really like some of the things he says, and I thought he made a really good point on this, where he talked about Clemson's downfall. And it all starts at the quarterback position. They had 2 elite college football quarterbacks. They had one in Taj Boyd that was really, really good, extremely dependable. Nebraska fans will remember him from watching him in bowl games. Really dependable in Taj Boyd. Then you move on to a guy named Deshaun Watson, who I get what he's done in the NFL and I understand all the off the field stuff, but specifically in the college game, really, really good. Kind of started this whole quarterback movement for the University of Clemson. Deshaun Watson, you get an elite guy in there, then you kind of fall off for just a moment. I believe Kelly Bryant, who was a Missouri transfer, was next there. He was fine. And then it's Trevor Lawrence's show. And then it's, okay, who's going to be next after Trevor Lawrence? Well, Trevor Lawrence gets picked up by the NFL, obviously, and you usher in DJ Uiagalelei. As Strick says, ooh, right? You get picked up by DJ Uiagalelei. 5-star out of St. John Bosco High School in California, football powerhouse. They compete against Mater Dei every single year. One of those teams that travels nationwide for games. And you think DJ Uiagalelei is probably the next guy. He struggles. And we understand that Dabo doesn't really want to use the transfer portal. And everybody wants to chalk it up to it's Dabo, it's his issue. It's not wanting to use the transfer portal. It's not wanting to just bring in guys and plug and play. I think more so it's been the misidentification of talent at the quarterback position. Because then they bring in, guess what? Another 5-star, another top 3 rated quarterback in the class. Cade Klubnik. Klubnik, he's fine. But now you've missed out on multiple quarterbacks in a row. And this has been Nebraska's maybe issue to bring it back home to Lincoln. You missed out on multiple quarterbacks in a row spanning over the course of a couple of seasons. You think, okay, we need to build around them, but we don't want to use the portal because we're going to give our quarterback time. We're going to let the guys around him kind of develop into something. And now if you're Clemson, you allowed in a time with Clemson, I think specifically over these last couple of years, they struggled to put guys around them, around the quarterback, because they had such elite quarterbacks. Texas could be similar, right? And think about how now Texas is kind of coming back to it. But Clemson had 2 elite quarterbacks in Deshaun and Trevor Lawrence back-to-back, where it was, you didn't really have to worry. They were going to go out and make plays. They were going to make their players around them better. And now Clemson's had 2 quarterbacks in DJ Uiagalelei a couple of years ago and Cade Klubnik, who can't really do that for them right now. Can't really do that right now for them. So now you have a serviceable quarterback, and this might be the same issue at Florida State. I mean, we can call it what it is. Maybe the same issue at Florida State. You have a serviceable Power 5 quarterback, and it just happens to be the same guy that played at both institutions, DJ Uiagalelei, or Cade Klubnik, who's currently the quarterback for Clemson. Looking around going, okay, who's here to help me? And you don't really have many people. You don't have a whole lot of people. I just think they're lacking identity, especially Florida State. Clemson's in this spot where it feels like the Texas Longhorns program in the mid 2010s, where they had like Sam Ehlinger and he was like, we're back, and they ended up not being back and they struggled to find a quarterback. Well, guess what? Now they did. They found a really, really good quarterback in Quinn Ewers, and they have talent around him as well. A lot of talent. Go through the list. Bijan Robinson with the Falcons now. Xavier Worthy with the Chiefs now. I mean, you can go up and down the list of high-level talent. Coaches get in trouble when they can't identify quarterbacks and they can't miss on those guys. Now coming to Nebraska, here you have it. Nebraska, let's call it what it was. Missed badly on Jeff Sims. But you have to give credit because they went out and did what they needed to do to not miss on their next guy. They didn't miss on Dylan Raiola. Big Ten Freshman of the Week, preseason freshman All-American. We saw it. We see the accolades. They're going to continue to roll in for the guy. And he's got his first big test this week. Colorado, 6:30 p.m. NBC. Let's break that down. Once again, tomorrow night, we'll be joined by Mark Johnson, the voice of the Buffaloes, on the radio. I was listening to, I ran to a local food establishment. They don't work with us, so we can't shout them out. A local food establishment last Thursday night with a couple of buddies. Turned on Sirius XM just because I wanted to listen to the football game. And guess who was on the radio? Mark Johnson, the guy we're going to talk to tomorrow night at 6:30, calling the Buffaloes and Bison last Thursday. We want to get his thoughts on that game. Dion talked earlier today on Tuesday, so we'll talk to Mark about that tomorrow night. There's a lot of stuff we'll get to with the voice of the Buffaloes, Mark Johnson, here tomorrow night at 6:30. He's going to stream in, so that'll be a really good one for folks on the video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Allo Channel 961 to really tune into, because you'll be able to see Mark and in addition to hear his voice. But if you can't, make sure you check out any of the show's podcast page, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Allo Channel 961. Like I said, all those platforms. Chime into the show, 402-464-5685. If you're just now joining us, it's the happy hour. I haven't decided, and this is complete transparency, haven't decided if we're going to change the name of the show. I might change the name. It might just be the Nick Sehnert Show. I don't know how I feel about that. I like to have a little bit of creativeness with it. Or creativity, rather, is how you'd say that probably. Creativity with it. I don't know. Might be the Nick Sehnert Show. Might just keep it the happy hour. Rico and I, we built this happy hour up to what it is. And I don't know if I want to keep that without Rico. That's just the honest truth. And so we'll see what happens. Myself, Nick Sehnert with you. Rico will join the show throughout the season. We'll also have, other ticket folks on here. Adam will be on here. Jay will be on here. Strick, Austin. We'll have all those guys in addition to our usual lineup of guests. So it's going to be a good time on the new and improved happy hour, I suppose. You can be the judge of if it's improved or not. 464-5685. We'll step aside, come right back on the happy hour. Shout out to our friends at Empire Fence Netting for their support of the program. As always, you can always reach out to me on Twitter, Nick_Sehnert. Always have a good time over there as well. Step aside, come right back in just a few minutes on the happy hour on 93.7 The Ticket. What is up? We are back here on the happy hour, 93.7 The Ticket, theticketfm.com. That's right, the happy hour starting at a new time here, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings. Check out for some stuff on the side. I've thought about kind of doing some other things on the side that obviously won't be able to go live on Thursday and Fridays because some other things are happening on the ticket. Some really cool things with We Talk Facts with Eric Strickland, Cluster Johnson, and those guys. And then Friday, obviously, with Austin Orman in the corner three. Plus, Friday's a little bogged down with high school football. So we'll do some stuff. You'll hear me throughout the course of the next couple of days, I'm sure. But just kind of stay tuned for that. You can always follow Nick_Sehnert on Twitter. That's a good place to kind of catch up and see what's all going on here with myself specifically. Ticket's really doing some cool things, obviously, as usual. The new show who took the 1 o'clock spot, not I don't mean any ill will by that. That sounded really harsh. I don't mean it like that. I'm excited for the 6 p.m. hour, but the 1 p.m. show, Coach Mikey Daniel and Chancellor Brewington, really good stuff there. Day 2 of their show is today. If you missed any of their show, check it out on the podcast page on wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff I want to get to throughout the course of the next 15 minutes. We were really long is on that segment there, talking about quarterbacks in the college football world. So I apologize if you were hanging out and said, okay, I'm gonna get out of my car when they take this break and just kept you around for 10 more minutes. Well, thank you, first of all, but also apologies there. We'll have a quick segment here. There was a comment that Marcus Satterfield, Nebraska's offensive coordinator, made earlier today regarding freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola. And he called him he was asked, how do you view Dylan's performance on Saturday? And he said something along the lines of, he was a frickin' surgeon out there. Let that sink in. He was a frickin' surgeon out there. And that's not paraphrasing. That is word for word, verbatim, what Marcus Satterfield said today. And initially you go, okay, yeah, he was great. It was against UTEP's defense. It was fine. And not to make this entire hour about quarterbacks, but now we can with Nebraska football. When was the last time you felt that way? And for the people that want to come at me and say, well, Nick, it was against UTEP, a team that has one program win against a Power 5 opponent in their entire school history. Well, has Nebraska been able to pick apart those types of teams before? 36 to what? Okay, let's just go through before I say the scores. Okay, so now in Power 5 teams that Nebraska struggled with in the last 10 years. McNeese State, that's probably a struggle. That was 2014, senior year of Amir Abdullah. There's plenty of games against Troy. I think Nebraska lost that one where Andrew Bunch was the starting quarterback because Adrian was hurt that day. I'm trying to think some more. Northern Illinois, Georgia Southern, the game that got Scott Frost fired. There's a lot. And I just named 4. That's 4 too many, in my opinion. And yes, there's through different coaching regimes, and there's something to be said about the coaching ability. But when was Nebraska able to do that? Hasn't necessarily been a plethora of times. Here's what I would ask Husker fans. From a program standpoint, in the last 10 years, so since the end of Bo Pelini, under Mike Riley, Scott Frost, and now Matt Rule, are you able to count on your hand more times that Nebraska took care of business against a non-Power 5 program like they did against UTEP on Saturday? Are you able to count those types of performances more than you are able to count the types of performances that we don't want to see? In our minds, we can probably, and I'm going to speak for Nebraska fans here, from a program standpoint, and I am fully aware that Matt Rule goes, hey, if he was sitting across the table from me right now, he would say, Nick, I don't care about what's been done before me. I mean, he does to an extent, but I don't care about the results. I'm trying to win now. I'm trying to win in year 2 of under Matt Rule. And I get that. But from a program standpoint, when you hear an offensive coordinator talk about his quarterback like this, after a performance, maybe we should make that clear. This came after a performance from Nebraska's quarterback. This wasn't in the summer where it's, multiple NFL scouts are saying, man, this is an NFL guy. This is an NFL guy. This is a guy that we're going to be saying his name in April. Yeah, they were saying that about Dylan Raiola here in a few years, but this is following a performance. You sit there and you go, okay, what do we have? What do we have here? You have a guy in Dylan Raiola who we know about his history, but man, did he look good on Saturday. Leading the offense. And it kind of goes back to what I said last week on the happy hour, on the conversations I had with Rico, and I think Austin was in there as well. And I also said it after Matt Rule's press conference where he's like, we're not easing Dylan into anything. Dylan is such a strong talent that we can't use the freshman excuse on him. We might not even have to, frankly. I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to, shower you listeners with Kool-Aid that says, hey, Dylan Raiola is the next Heisman winner for the University of Nebraska. That's unruly expectation. But also, what's the expectation here in Nebraska for a quarterback right now? Probably stay healthy, lead the offense, and probably stick around. Stick around at Nebraska. That's what I mean. That's the expectation. Get to a bowl game? Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Dylan Raiola has this weight of the 5-star status that doesn't really matter anymore because he's here and he's just now a college football player with Nebraska. I think about from the outside looking in, what are the expectations? Like if I was an Oklahoma fan and I sat here and was like, okay, from my standpoint, what do I think is a good season for Dylan Raiola? And then I would have asked myself the same question regarding Adrian Martinez. I think the answers would have been different. Now, Adrian Martinez was a highly rated recruit. Yeah, but he was also coming off of the heels of Mike Riley, where they had a 9-win season and they went to a bowl game, despite how fraudulent or not 9-win caliber type of team they were. It was 9 wins. So I sat there and I said, okay, so if you're Adrian Martinez, if I was an Oklahoma fan or if I was a Clemson fan or a Florida fan or whatever the case may be, and I would look at Nebraska from a 5,000-mile radius and say, okay, well, what would constitute for a new quarterback limiting turnovers, holding onto the ball, leading the offense, and getting them to, back then in 2018, back to 9-10 wins. That was the expectation maybe for Adrian, and that's fine. But now what is it for Dylan? I had this conversation with a former player who I won't say. And I was like, all right, so what do you think is like, how much pressure is Dylan feeling? And I remember them telling me, they're like, Nick, he should feel pressure, right? Because it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be nervous before a game. But also your parameters for success are even smaller than what they were 5 years ago with Adrian. That 9 wins with every losing season trickles down to, well, what are we saying now? Just make a bowl game, Dylan. Just make a bowl game. Help Nebraska make a bowl game. And you're 1/6 of the way there. Mind you, 1/6 of the way there after week 1 is the closest Nebraska's been since 2019. I'll say that again. Being 1/6, if we want to break it down into fractions for the mathematic folks out there, being 1/6 of the way there, 1/6 of a win there to just making a bowl game after week 1, after your first game of the season. And this goes back to how many times can you count on your hand the games that maybe Nebraska either made tight or lost against non-Power 5 teams. You can probably count more of those than the performances like you had against UTEP on Saturday. But being 1/6 of the way there after your first game of competition in the regular season is as close. They are as close as they have been since 2019. 5 years. 5 years. Pressure is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. But you hear Marcus Satterfield talk about how Dylan looked like a freaking surgeon out there. Yeah, I get pretty excited, I think. And I think you guys should too. Let's step aside. We wrap up the show coming up next on the Happy Hour. Welcome back in. It's the Happy Hour. Nick Sehnert with you. Reminder, if you're just now joining us, Rico will join me from time to time, but mainly it's going to be myself. Nick Sehnert's on the show. Appreciate Empire Fence and Netting for their support of the program as always. All right. So one thing I do want to talk about real quick, and this is just like a kind of a personal thing. Former Pius X alumni, Michael Hellman. If you guys know baseball at all, and I understand it's not baseball season, but I do want to just throw this out there. Michael Hellman, the former Pius X superstar, I think it's okay to say that, one of the best Thunderbolts to ever play, especially after his high school career, ends up a super cool story here. Graduated just before I got there, but walks on after his high school career, walks on at Hutchinson Community College, which for baseball folks, non-baseball folks, pretty good program, pretty good JUCO down there in Hutchinson, Kansas. Michael Hellman walks on there, wins, gets awarded the National Junior College Player of the Year down there at Hutchinson. Michael Hellman did. I'm trying to find, hopefully, his stats here real quick. So how about this one? So this comes from, the Texas A&M Athletics, because after he wins the NJCAA, National Junior College Athletic Association, I think is what it's named. After he wins the Junior College Player of the Year, he was a 2-year starter at Hutchinson. 2017 National Junior College Athletic Association Player of the Year, as well as American Baseball Coaches Association Gold Glove second baseman. He was all NJCAA first team, all Kansas Jayhawk Community College Conference, all Region 6 first team, and KJCAA Western Division most valuable player, all that, and so forth and so forth. How about this? As a sophomore in 2017 at Hutch, and I just want to throw this out there, set the single season record for hits. He had 111 hits on the season, led the nation with a 487 batting average, scored 103 runs, ranked second in junior college and on-base percentage, 8th in slugging percentage, had 17 doubles, 5 triples, 17 home runs. How about that? Same number of home runs as doubles. 17 home runs, 17 doubles, 73 RBI, and guess how many games? 60. In 60 games, had all of that. Led the KJCCC in batting average, hits, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and runs. As a freshman, still hit .416, had 20 doubles, 9 home runs, 58 RBIs, 25 stolen bases in 57 games. Holds the career and single season hits record at Hutch, which is really, really impressive. Ends up going to Texas A&M. I digress. Ends up going to Texas A&M. And ends up going to Texas A&M, starts at, I believe, shortstop, second baseman for the Aggies down there, and gets drafted after his 2018 season as a junior, gets drafted by the Minnesota Twins. How about this? Gets called up. So Michael Hellman, he is starting tonight, making his major league debut. The Twins, they play tonight, Minnesota Twins. They're down in Tampa Bay. They started 5:50 p.m. So makes his major league debut tonight against the Tampa Bay Rays. So it's good stuff. They're pretty exciting stuff as a Pius baseball alum myself to see one of our guys making it to the big leagues, but a really cool situation there for Texas A&M baseball, for Hutchinson, and for Pius X. Michael Hellman, shout out to you, my man. All right, let's step aside. We're out of here. DPE coming up next. 93.7 The Ticket. Reminder, Mark Johnson, the voice of the Colorado Buffaloes, joins us tomorrow. We'll step aside. We're out of here. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night. Thanks for listening. 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com.